Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button if you guys are enjoying the content that we're throwing up, and make sure you guys hit the like button if you enjoy the video. And yeah, let's begin. All right, what's going on, guys? This is Rob, and welcome back to the conclusion of Fantastic Four and X-Men, or X-Men Fantastic Four, whatever you want to call it. But Franklin Richards on the cusp of either joining the X-Men or leaving the Fantastic Four. And as we know from what we've seen so far, he joined the X-Men. And this is the coolest thing, right? Because up to this point, we basically had Franklin, who was brought to a kind of private island of Victor Von Doom. But all the roads of the various heroes more or less brought them here. And the goal of Dr. Doom was to basically reinstate the powers or restore the powers of Franklin Richards. Now, for those of you guys who don't recall exactly what's going on here, Franklin's powers have basically been waning, and this is really what kind of began in the Fantastic Four line of comics, and is basically picked up here. The idea that Franklin is able to tap into what's called the God power, or at least seemingly that's where everybody with powers derives their abilities from, this kind of singular God power source. It's not really been fully explored, but whatever the case is, Franklin's access to this power has basically been cut off. And so, like water basically disappearing out of a cup, his powers are going away. And so the idea of Victor Von Doom was to basically reinstate his connection and restore his powers back to the way they were before, presumably even more powerful, right? Because Franklin is a character who's able to alter and control reality on a universal scale, but that's only ever really just a stone's throw away from manipulating reality on a multiversal scale. The only difference there is whether or not he can permeate barriers between universes and then control those barriers and then extend his control beyond those barriers into other universes, right? So Franklin has a potential to be on the living tribunals level in terms of the power that he possesses. He just, for whatever reason, hasn't or possibly will never get there yet, right? I mean, we saw with Jonathan Hickman's Fantastic Four and the future of his character in his Avengers and New Avengers run, that Franklin never really becomes multiversal. He just becomes a universal character who's on par with Galactus. But the other part of this is that when the X-Men followed and basically arrived here, because of course the Fantastic Four are trying to get Franklin back, the X-Men are trying to get Franklin to his side, that what ended up happening is a handful of mutants that basically vanished are more or less discovered here on this island, in the sense that they were put inside the bodies, or I guess these giant kind of doom sentinels that are basically attacking the X-Men, right? Because the rule was, if the X-Men are going to be here, they can't move beyond their quarters, right? They can't explore the island, they can't leave, they can't violate any of those rules that Dr. Doom laid down, which of course they did. And so that basically led to why you see these massive sentinels here. Now, one of the coolest things that comes out of this, and this is usually what happens when it comes to these kinds of stories, especially one like this, that's not necessarily flying under the radar, but one that really isn't getting a whole lot of advertisement here, is you see these small little moments, right? And this is how powers change. This is how they adjust. And so what ends up happening is basically where this giant force field is around Franklin Richards, that you've got Susan Storm, who tries to use her ability to manipulate force fields to get past it. She can't. And Kitty Pryde, of course, can make herself light, right? She can modify her body's genetic structure so she can pass through solid matter. And when she does that, she almost kind of taunts Doom, right? Like, I made it through your force field. Did you really believe this could hold me? And Doom basically says, I've been analyzing what it is that you can do. I can override your powers, and I can take your powers in a direction that you never even thought of, right? For example, if you can make yourself lighter than air, then why can't you just make yourself heavier than concrete? And so literally she just goes flying through the ground, right? Dr. Doom overrides her powers and increases her density. You never really see this with Kitty Pryde. Kitty Pryde's power has always been to move through solid matter, basically. What this means is that with Kitty Pryde going forward, she can increase her density to make herself, more durable, right? Like bulletproof if she wanted to. She can make herself lighter than air. Presumably, she could even gain the power to fly, right? Depending on what direction Marvel wants to take her character in. But small little adjustments like this. Now, for their part, with Susan Storm trying to break through this force field, she's contacted by Emma Frost, who basically says the missing mutants are all inside these giant, sentinels of Dr. Doom, and that they can't destroy the sentinels because it'll kill the kids. And so they need help basically deactivating them, kind of shutting them down. And so Susan ends up intervening and basically going to help. Now, while that happens, it also leads to Nightcrawler kind of jumping in, Susan Storm helping to dismantle these sentinels. And this is one of the cool things here, right? This is why Susan Storm is such a powerful character, that when it comes to somebody like her, she is in a lot of ways a one-man army. And it's one of these things you don't really see a lot of appreciation for when it comes to her character, right? You see Susan Storm tending to the children or something like that. But the truth of this is that she can create force fields. She's got some measure of telekinesis, right? She can do all kinds of cool things. But she literally starts breaking apart these various sentinels so that they're effectively destroyed, but the mutants contained within are not killed. Now, for Franklin Richards himself, which is really the meat and potatoes of this story, for Franklin, it's really kind of been an existential crisis for his character. Because with Franklin, when he was a little kid, he didn't really have much reason to question his parents, right? He was young. Kids don't usually question what their parents tell them. But as kids grow older, they kind of begin to push barriers, right? It's what we do, right? We become teenagers. We kind of get into that realm where we want to become adults. We want that kind of freedom that comes along with it and start taking our lives in our own direction. The unfortunate side of this is that as teenagers, we feel like we have it all figured out. And so we look at the restraints that our parents put on us as limitations, as opposed to things that can basically guide us and get us to where we want to be, just in a more practical way so that we're not possibly inflicting harm on ourselves. So for Franklin, he's been wanting to kind of break away and go out into this world on his own and chart his own path. The other part of this is that Reed and Susan are parents. They're moms and dads, and they don't want their kid to kind of get out there into the world, right? They want their kid to stay home, to be safe. They don't want things to change, right? That's kind of what this is. That's really what it comes down to. They want Franklin to get better. They want Franklin to reach his full potential, but they don't want anything to change. And in order for Franklin to get there, he has to change, right? He has to evolve. He has to grow. And that's what Kitty Pryde asks him, right? Like she kind of breaks in, back into this sort of field that Dr. Doom had, right? And then before the armor that Dr. Doom had put on Franklin fully takes its hold in terms of modifying his power, whatever it is that Dr. Doom intends to do, she basically asks Franklin, what is it that you want here? And this is the one thing that nobody asked. Nobody asked Franklin Richards what he wanted, right? It was just the X-Men showed up on the doorstep of the Fantastic Four one day and said, your son's a mutant, he belongs with us. The response of the Fantastic Four is, no, he's our kid, he belongs with us. And nobody asked, Franklin, who do you think you belong with? Which really kind of goes back to the history between Franklin and Kitty Pryde in the sense that they've always kind of had this long-standing friendship. As a result of this, Franklin basically says, like, I want to go with my mom, right? I want to go and I want to help everybody else alongside her. And so, of course, this allows Franklin to travel outside and then kind of initiate this sort of energy burst and then basically take out all these little sentinels. But again, Franklin's powers aren't necessarily totally gone, but they're being drained even faster now, right? Every time he uses his powers, they drain just a little bit more. And that's one of the things that kind of gets hit at here is that one, Dr. Doom's not actually there, right? Like Professor X picks up on this pretty fast and Dr. Doom's not there. Dr. Doom takes it as an offense that what the mutants have done by showing up on his doorstep and then violating his rules in his home is they in turn have basically, not really declared war on Latveria in the official sense, but in the sense that like they basically pissed off Dr. Doom is really what that means. Now for his part, he's not wrong. He went to Franklin, Franklin basically ended up on his doorstep. Dr. Doom threw information to Franklin that he could fix Franklin's powers. The X-Men were chasing after him because they were like, you belong with us, whether you want to be or not. We're taking mutants from all over the world and we're bringing them to our island. They belong here, right? So, it's one of these things where the X-Men kind of impose themselves on Franklin. And then over the fact they believe that like all mutants belong with them, they in turn violated the rules of Dr. Doom's own home, right? So they walked into another man's home and started telling him what's what. Of course it's going to piss off Dr. Doom. And so that's one of the crazy things, because with Latveria being its own sovereign nation, the actions of the X-Men is to encroach on another sovereign nation, right? So they're basically the aggressors in this circumstance. And so what this leads is to really everybody kind of asking the question they should have been asking to begin with, right? Like, Franklin, what is it that you want? And Franklin's response is, I want to go learn about myself. I want to learn about mutants. I want to learn about people like me, right? I don't want to just have this discussion. I don't want to just talk about that. I want to live amongst my own people. And this is the hardest thing, especially for Susan Storm to hear, because as a parent, she doesn't want him to leave, right? She wants him to stay. She wants things to always be the way they were. And that's what's so cool about this, because as people, we don't like change, especially comic book fans. As comic book fans, we hate it when things change, right? That's why you always have that movement where it's like comic book stores need to be there forever. Even though it's not practical, it's not a reasonable expectation, people don't want things to change. And so because of that, it's kind of a cool way to tap into the reality of things, because even beyond comics, just as people, once we kind of get into our comfort zone, we don't want things to shift. We don't want things to change. I'm actually going through that whole process and dealing with that right now, being in Columbus on a personal level. It's a cool thing to kind of see here, right? And so ultimately, this leads to Franklin basically departing his family and then traveling with the X-Men. Now, about 3 weeks later, we pick up with Franklin, who's again, on the island of Krakoa, working with Beast, and Beast still isn't able to figure out why Franklin's powers are draining, right? Why his powers are basically going away. And so what it does is it's a quick little throwaway thing, not a great big huge moment here, just kind of showing this is what they've been working on for the last 3 weeks. And ultimately, Franklin decides he wants to go back home again, at least for dinner, to see his family. And you end up having Magneto and Professor X who join him. Now, the other part of this is Valeria, one of the smartest people in the entirety of the Marvel Universe. And she picked up on the fact that within this armor of Dr. Doom that was put on Franklin Richards, that while everybody else was analyzing everything going on, that what she was doing was looking at the actual suit itself, itself, right? What the suit itself was actually capable of. And what she learned was that what Dr. Doom had intended to do was basically bolster the power of Franklin Richards, return them to normal, but at the same time, siphon some of that power off and give it to himself. And when the question was asked why, the response of Dr. Doom is because there's a war coming, right? There's a conflict coming. And the reality is that mutants do present a credible threat to the rest of the world. And what this basically means is that while Dr. Doom isn't necessarily intending to go to war with mutant kind, it does mean he's aware of the fact that things could get bleak, right? So in a lot of ways, tapping into the events we saw in House and Powers of X, that Dr. Doom is prepping for whatever moves the mutants can make later on down the line. And being able to harness the power of Franklin Richards, even if only on a minute scale, would put him miles ahead of where he is right now, and even further beyond where the mutant population is right now, minus Franklin himself, and then probably Legion, maybe a few other people, but it would certainly even the odds and give Dr. Doom the ability to protect himself. And so with Professor X and Magneto arriving at the residence of the Fantastic Four, they travel to visit Reed. And what they talk about here is this mutant gene cloaking device, this device that Reed had made that basically allowed him to cloak the gene of mutants who were out there and even cut their powers off completely. And initially, it almost seemed like they showed up here with the intention of saying, hey, like, we want this, like, we want to be able to take this and use this for our own ends, but that's not the case. Instead, they see it as an absolute affront, the worst offense Reed Richards could have made in relation to the mutant population. And that's an important thing to understand here, because it's not as though Reed Richards was doing this from a place of being vindictive, but what's to stop somebody from taking that technology of Reed Richards and then using it for nefarious purposes? That's why this is important, right? And so because of this, Magneto destroys the cloaking device, and then Charles Xavier wipes the ability for Reed Richards to be able to make it again, right? Like, he basically destroys that part of his brain so he can never remake this thing again. And so it'll be this little piece of Reed Richards' mind that's always missing. And this is huge, right? Because Xavier references their time in the Illuminati and basically says, like, when we were together on the Illuminati team, there was a time when I would have taken this a step further and I would have wiped your mind of this meeting entirely. And so as far as your brain is concerned, you never invented that device and you have no idea that we ever met. They would just be kind of shut out forever. But the response of Xavier is, I want you to remember this moment. I want you to understand that I did this to you, that as a mutant population, we have a right to survive by any means necessary. And whether friend or foe, we'll take whatever steps we need to in order to prevent you or anybody else from getting in the way of our ability to use our powers or to be a successful race out there just making our way in the world. And so he basically tells them, welcome to the new world order, right? So again, this is moving continually towards the idea that Xavier is becoming more and more extreme. And in a lot of ways, Xavier's kind of becoming a bad guy, almost becoming like the way Magneto was, where it was protecting the mutant race by any means necessary. But with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoy this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.